All right, welcome this evening. We've got, of course, really big news coming in about the Adani Group being investigated by the Department of Justice, or the DOJ, in the US for bribery and for corruption. And these are really, really serious cases. And I'll tell you why this is not something that can easily be dismissed as baseless. And this is something that is going to cost the company and the group dearly in capital markets, stock markets, and investment markets across the world. But the idea with this video, and if you stick through till the end of it, will be to explain to you in simple English what is really going on. All right. So let me start by sharing my screen, and I'll show you this tweet. Now, the tweet we're going to put up is actually a tweet that was put out by Gautam Adani himself. And this was in reaction to Donald Trump winning the elections. There you'll see it. That's the tweet where basically he had promised, or he had talked about $10 billion of investments in energy and infrastructure in the US. And he committed to this on a post on social media congratulating Donald Trump. And he said a lot of wonderful things about Donald Trump in other tweets as well. And he seemed really bullish about the fact that Trump had won the election. Things are changing very drastically for Gautam Adani on the ground, and not slow enough, because it's going to be mid-January before Donald Trump takes over. And even if he does, he will not have enough influence. The President of the United States doesn't have enough influence to change a DOJ investigation when it goes to court. Now, this is what we have so far. Let me take you through the actual accusations that are coming in. That's again on the shared screen. Now, this is from Bar and Bench. The charges that the United States Securities and Exchange Committee, first of all, the Security and Exchange Commission is like apna SEBI, which takes a look at fraud in the stock market and in their capital markets. Now, they have announced that Adani Group's chairperson, Gautam Adani, and 7 other company executives, including his nephew, Sagar Adani, have been charged with bribery. Bribing who? Not the American government, but Indian governments, Indian state governments, bribing them or promising bribes of 2,000 crore rupees, or a little over $265 million, in order to get contracts to supply green energy to Indian state governments, which would have yielded a profit of $2 billion over the next 20 years. So effectively what it's saying is that this group, and specifically its green energy arm, had promised bribes to Indian state governments, in return had gotten contracts secured to sell power to these state governments. Now, why is that a problem in the United States if the bribes are being paid in India? That's a question to ask. Because these contracts were then used to raise money in the US market from US investors, and millions of dollars, and also in loans. And that is why that is a problem. Now, I want to pause here for a second to tell you what is the US Department of Justice and why this is important. Now, the US Department of Justice is its federal, so it's central government investigative arm. And under this Department of Justice, which is headed by its Attorney General, so its senior most lawyer for the government, it investigates antitrust, so basically Apna Competition Commission. It investigates civil rights, criminal, tax and environmental laws. It controls the FBI. It controls the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the US Drug Enforcement Administration, and several other justice programs, the Marshal Service, the National Central Bureau, and their portion of the Interpol. So it's really a very large, very senior investigating and a justice department, and they have now come out with this investigation. I'm going to take you to the next story that we have right now, and this one is from Bloomberg, right? So Bloomberg has done an analysis, and this is a really interesting article written by Menaka Doshi a former senior colleague of mine, where she talks about how even though Gautam Adani put out a statement saying DOJ investigations say that you are innocent until proven guilty, this is a statement from the Adani group, as far as investors are concerned, it's not so simple, because a DOJ investigation, like I just explained to you, is extremely serious. And as a result, what is going to happen is that investors will now shy away from this company altogether across the world, because this is perhaps the most serious investigation that could come up against a company. Now, the other thing I wanted to explain to you is why this is a problem in the US. Like I said, the US has laws as to how you should access their capital markets. And in those laws, there is an anti-corruption, anti-bribery law. So the accusation is effectively that the Adani group was aware of the fact that they had agreed to pay bribes. They concealed that fact and still accessed the US market without allegedly declaring that they had promised these bribes, and that violates about 4 of their different federal or their central government laws. Now, I want to show you this. There's also a link. Now, this is widely available across Twitter and across the internet, which is the entire document. That's what you're looking at right now. This is filed to the clerk's office of the district court in Brooklyn. It's the United States District Court, New York. This is where the indictment or the charges, which means that the investigation has been done and the charges have now been filed before a court. And if we scroll to the top page, which is what I'm going to do now, if we go right up to the top page, you will see that it is against the first accused. There it is Gautam Adani himself. Under that is his, excuse me, his nephew Sagar Adani and Vineet Jain. If you see the spelling is different, he is the CEO of Green Energy, Adani Green Energy, and there are several other individuals. Now, this is a 52-page document. It scrolls into many, many pages. I was just reading through it, and it details a lot of what they consider violations of their law. So it talks about the fact that, for example, that Mr. Adani himself was aware that his nephew was actually being investigated. Now, I'm going to take you through some of those details. Now, this started apparently on the March 2023, so March last year. So it's been over a year and a half, maybe more than that. That apparently, allegedly, the Adani group was aware of this investigation, where US enforcement agencies were investigating the group, and and specifically Sagar Adani had been searched by FBI agents in New York, and they had taken some of his devices into custody. Could have been his phone, could have been his laptop. He was then served with what the Americans call a grand jury subpoena. If you watch enough Law and Order and Boston Legal and Suits, whichever one you prefer, you know what a grand jury subpoena is. It's basically a legal document that informs a person that they are being investigated or they are the subject of a very serious investigation. Now, we also understand apparently through this document that Gautam Adani emailed to himself photographs of each page of the search warrant and the grand jury subpoena that had been served to his nephew, which means that he was aware of this investigation in March last year. In March this year, a news report appeared about Adani facing US investigations about potential bribery and a conglomerate that was, they, of course, remember that at that point they had denied it. But also the question to ask for us here is, among Indian investors, why it was not required to make this public to Indian investors. Again, here the question will arise on SEBI, which is our regulator, as to why they have not been, why they've not been stricter on Adani while this investigation was on in the US. SEBI continued to sort of take the side of Adani in India to break down the allegations piece by piece, right? Now, between, excuse me, it's a change of weather, I think, or maybe pollution in Mumbai. Between 2020 and 2024, so 4 years, 5 people have been named to conspire to bribe Indian officials for energy contracts. Now, the total sum of $228 million was apparently out of the entire, remember I told you, Out of that entire $260 million, $228 million was promised to only one official. We don't know that name of the official, to get electricity supplied to the state of Andhra Pradesh, particularly from Adani. Now, there's a follow up story by News Minute and by Scroll that has linked a couple of things and said that this was at the time when Andhra Pradesh was being run by Jagan Mohan Reddy. And it is likely that this $200 million bribe happened at the time that Jagan Mohan Reddy was in charge of the state of Andhra Pradesh. Now, these apparently contracts that were then given via after these bribes were used to raise more than $300 billion in loans and bonds from US investors, concealing the bribery scheme. And that is where the problem is. The indictment says that the accused I beg your pardon. The accused lied about the bribery scheme as they sought to raise capital from the US and from international investors, and that is where the problem is. It also alleges that on several occasions, Gautam Adani personally met with government officials to advance this bribery scheme. So this was what that document that I showed you actually effectively says is that Gautam Adani himself, and apparently he was being referred to as the big man. And one of my colleagues actually joked saying, is this a bad translation or that the Americans are making for Motabhai, his name to big man? But effectively what they're saying is that he was personally allegedly aware of everything that was happening, and he was part of the negotiations of this bribery scheme. Now, I want to show you also the response that has come from the Adani Group, which has denied this indictment as baseless. Now, they have said, and this is a really interesting sort of statement to come from the company. They have said, and I'm quoting, as stated by the Department of Justice, all charges are allegations and the defendants are innocent until proven guilty. Now, here's the thing. In jurisprudence, which is basically legal theory, which we follow in India as well, you are all innocent until proven guilty, because it is the court that will have to say that you are guilty. So that process has only just begun. But that is not necessarily a defense. I mean, you can't go to court and say, you're accusing me of murder, but I'm innocent until proven guilty. But what is your evidence of your innocence? So this media-sized statement has not offered any evidence of innocence. They've just said we're innocent until proven guilty, and all possible recourse, legal recourse will be sought. It's gone on to say, for all of our investors, we've always followed the rules. But there is no real evidence of that following of rules. Now, as per what has happened today in the market, the shares of Adani Enterprises were down 22%. Other group firms closed in the red. They apparently lost about 20%. Now, quick on the heels of that, remember, the Adani Group has contracts not just, the Adani Group has all our ports, most of our airports. It has the contract for Dharavi redevelopment in Mumbai. It has the contract for massive solar power, as you can see, to sell to our state governments. In some cases, we've had reports that allege that state governments are buying power from the Adani Group at a cost that is far higher than it should be. Plus, we've had issues in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in Kenya, and in Australia with this particular group. Now, in Kenya particularly, the group was given the contract to construct the main Nairobi airport, which is being redone, and there have been accusations of bribery of the Kenyan authorities and the Kenyan government in order to get that contract. Now, we now understand that Kenya has cancelled Adani contracts because of these fraud investigations. The Kenyan president has cancelled deals with the Adani Group, which involved the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, that's the one that I was telling you about, the Kenya Electricity Transmission Committee, which is basically their electricity, and this is because of the US indictment. Now, these cancellations were announced during a state address made by the president of Kenya today, highlighting both economic development and governance issues. So what's going to happen very likely is, like we saw the last time during the Hindenburg accusation that came out and the investigation that followed, and we saw very interestingly our Supreme Court actually, instead of asking for an investigation into Adani, asked for an investigation into Hindenburg. Now, what's going to happen is that this is the Department of Justice of the United States government, right? This is not a short seller that you can write off saying they have a vested interest. These are accusations that are going to have to be taken seriously by Indian law enforcement, by Indian government, by SEBI, and by the Supreme Court. Even so, step aside, even if India decides to do nothing, the rest of the world is going to take this very seriously, which means the American markets, Kenyan markets, they're likely to cancel contracts, and no investor is going to touch this company with a barge pole, and that is going to be really serious for Adani. Leave me a note on what you think is going to happen next.